My name is Paul Rogers. I'm the curator of public programs and education at the Museum of Art and Design at Miami-Dade College. And I want to welcome you to tonight's dialogue between Jorge Pardo and Russell Ferguson. And before I introduce them, you'll see at the bottom of the screen a Q&A. While they were talking, if you have any questions, go ahead and type your question into the Q&A. And around 7:10, we will begin to open up to questions for either speaker or both. And I will read the questions to them so we can move pretty swiftly if there's likely to be a lot this evening. Okay, so Russell Ferguson is a curator and a writer, formerly a curator at the Museum of Contemporary Art, Los Angeles, chief curator at the Hammer Museum, Los Angeles, and a professor at the University of California, Los Angeles. He has organized many exhibitions, including In Memory of My Feelings, Frank O'Hara and American Art, and Perfect Likeness, Photography and Composition, as well as solo exhibitions by Francis Alice, Patty Chang, Douglas Gordon, Liz Larner, Larry Johnson, and Christian Markley. With Carrie Brugger, he organized Damage Control, Art and Destruction since 1950. Born in Havana, Cuba in 1963, Jorge Pardo studied at the University of Illinois, Chicago, and received his BFA from Art Center to College of Design in Pasadena, California. Pardo's work has been the subject of solo exhibitions at the Pinacoteca de Estado, São Paulo, Musée de Augustins, Toulouse, Irish Museum of Modern Art, Dublin, K21 Kunstsammlung Nordrhein-Westfalen, Düsseldorf, Los Angeles County Museum of Art, and Museum of Contemporary Art, North Miami. Paintings by the artist were included in the 57th Venice Biennale. Jorge Pardo currently lives and works in Merida, Mexico. Please give a warm welcome, obviously you can, to Jorge Pardo and Russell Ferguson.
So we'll get started.
Yep.
I'm assuming everyone can hear us. The last time we talked, Jorge, was while you were still in the preparation stage for the exhibition. And I'm just wondering, now that it's been up for a while and you've had a chance to see it, how do you feel about it? How did it turn out differently than you expected, or is it pretty much what you had planned? And I know I'm asking that in part because I know that the site, the Freedom Tower, is a site of historical significance for you as an individual, as well as for the Cuban community in Miami. What was the experience like of actually having the show there?
It was good. It was interesting. I mean, it was, you know, it's a different place than when I was there 52 years ago, actually. Yeah. I think I got processed there in 1969.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, there wasn't, I mean, I have these very, you know, kind of convoluted memories of what it was like. I was 6 years old when I went through there. I just remember, I remember everything was painted white, and there were like beds with big white bars and stuff like that, like old, like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest kind of beds.
Yeah.
And, but the show, back to the beginning of your question, which is that, you know, what's the show like now after doing it, since we spoke before?
Yeah.
It was actually up. It's good. I mean, you know, there's always the kind of the realization of how the space meets the work, and I was very happy with that.
Mm.
You know, I thought the number of works fit really well.
But in that sense, you're talking about the space as if it could be any physical space. So it's not that it met the work because it had a specific set of memories or associations for you, or was it some of both?
It could be both. I mean, but I was referring really physically more than anything else. But I think that the space, if we kind of turn the question in that direction, which is actually an interesting way to look at it, is, I think I've always sort of had a kind of a detached kind of way of thinking of those events, or never quite understood the prolonged sense of drama about it. Everybody's got a different position that leaves, obviously, but we went to Chicago, and it was going there was like the thing that I remember about, I guess what I was interested in sort of, if the works convey anything, what I was interested in is in having the works convey a kind of the sense of discombobulation, of the memory of the kind of experience or something like that. So,
Yeah.
so I just took all these sort of images of different things that I liked, that I was sort of formed by, that I did, and then it's almost like throwing them in the blender.
Yeah.
And that's sort of how I kind of remember that period of my life, and yeah.
Yeah. I mean, maybe we could talk a little bit about the process of making the work a bit. You said in the little film that's on the museum's website that for you, more is always more, less is never more. And clearly there's a very additive process in putting layers and layers of information that culminate in these dense drawings that constitute the bulk of the exhibition. How exactly does that process work? Can you walk us through? You said, there are things that you like, and are you then just scanning these images? You're layering one on top of the other? How does it work?
Well, I will start by collecting a series of images that I find interesting. It could be, I don't know, images of lichen to a painting by an artist that particularly captures my eye at the moment, or something like that, or an image that I made, or maybe a painting that I've made in the past, or a topical event or something like that. And when I say capture these things, I mean that this is a kind of a process that begins by me doing what we're doing now. We're in front of the computer, and I'm sifting through different modes of visuality. And then I just kind of like, I have an Apple, so I hit, Shift Command 4, and I take a picture of the screen, and I put it aside, and then I put another one aside, and then I put another one aside, and then after a while, and I have a kind of a folder, and then I start to take those things and I play with them. I start to intermesh them one into the other. Sometimes there's 5 that go on top of each other. Sometimes there's 10, and at a certain point, you just sort of like, that process is interesting to me because it reminds me a lot of when I used to paint, and when I was an abstract painter, when I was a student. In that, there's when you're painting, you're trying to find something in that process, in a moment, or a gestalt of you doing the act, and then the interesting moment happening, or whatever. It's like you're mostly losing that.
Yeah.
You're not really finding it. You know what I mean? It's like that with when you're just layering images and kind of pulling from things and things like that. And at a certain point, you sort of hit onto something, and then you go, okay, if I had a little more yellow up here, so I'll go back and look for an image that's got yellow in the corner of some sort. It could be anything, because there's so many things that are being layered that things you put on top immediately, as they sort of get infused into the image, their identity dissolves.
Well, I mean, it sounds like you're beginning with things that are in a way very personal to you, or striking and emotional, or an aesthetic card with you, and that are in a way quite specific images, like a painting you like, etc. And then as the process goes along, you're kind of devolving away from that specific content, so that you, as you say, you're looking for another bit of yellow to match something in the work, or in other words, it goes from a very specific set of images with real specific content into something that in some ways is much more traditionally aesthetic, like an abstract painter who's just thinking about it.
And I think, I think that since these works don't really begin with ideas, those ideas are usually things that require a kind of that they be illustrated to some degree in order to sort of come into being. So I don't really start that way. They just start with a kind of a collation, they start by a series of images that are collated into these different folders for different reasons on different days, different moments. And when I say that more is always more, less is never more. What I mean by that, I think it's very difficult. It's these images and the way that I work. I've never really worked with the idea of making how do you say adding like a Puritan, like there's no purity, there's no aspiration for refinement, there's no aspiration for purity, there's no aspiration for clarity, there's no aspiration for reference that be understood or misunderstood. It's just a mess of images that just keep going onto each other and on top, and they get taken from behind, they get put and blah blah blah. And it's about as close as I've gotten to really going back and using a paintbrush in a funny way, and it's ridiculously simple, and but it's very satisfying.
It also seems to be quite different than the way a lot of contemporary artists are.
Sorry about that.
Hello.
Alexis just came in with the baby.
Hi. Hi. A lot of contemporary art does actually seem to be coming at it from the other point of view, where it is quite explicitly seeking to illustrate or make a kind of almost didactic point, where the passage from A to B to C is really quite literal often. Do you feel that your way of working is kind of an outlier in that context, or do you even worry about those things about where how you're working is relating to how other people are working?
I'm not really aware of.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that there's a ton of representational painting out there right now, and a ton of beaten to death proto-conceptual projects, which I have absolutely no interest in. But I think that I think there's a misunderstanding of that tradition a lot of times when I get like the tradition of work from the 60s and 50s and 70s. That is, it gets sort of used and abused under the umbrella of conceptual art.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And for me, those works that were interesting from that period are always the ones that resisted a kind of an illustrative logic to some degree.
What's an example of a work from an earlier period that resisted that?
Oh, I think somebody like Baldessari was really good at that, for instance. I mean, there's he's a conceptual artist, but one of the more important engines or motors in that work is play, really.
Yeah, and in fact, it's something that some other more, in their own minds at least, rigorous conceptual artists criticized Baldessari for, I think, is both the element of humor and play in the work, and also that he would kind of sometimes use the conceptual driving force to take the work in a unexpected and kind of odd direction that wasn't what you'd expect.
Yeah, he saw the mechanism as a mechanism to be sort of, to be kind of optimized to do some things that aren't necessarily what he wasn't thinking about, but as opposed to kind of that mechanism to kind of confirm some sort of quasi data or whatever. That because in the 70s there was always and there still is to some degree, that there's always a schism between like the social sciences. There's research that's done there.
Yeah,
we don't have anything like that in the fine art departments. So, you know, as it became more and more academic and more about theory, then, you know, one of the ways that people legitimize that is to kind of think about turn thinking in thinking the work in a way into some sort of a product of investigation, which never really panned out.
But more and more we hear the term research used by artists to describe their practice. I have a research-based practice, etc. And
just that notion of practice, it's the most annoying. Practice is one of the most annoying terms in the history of art. You know, doctors practice, you know, the baseball players practice, soccer players, artists don't practice.
You just make art, is that?
We make art. We're not, you know, I'm not a quasi social scientist. I don't ever want to be read that way. I think it's ludicrous. But anyway.
Well, let's just continue to the final stage of the process. Once you have a lot of layered images and they're looking the way you want them to look on the screen, then you turn them into actual tactile, unique drawings. How does that process work, and why, for example, do you do that stage? I mean, you could presumably just output them as digital images. What's the importance of going to the next step and returning them to?
I think it's important to even the simple way that I do it is to charge the space between your head, the computer, and the wall. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that's interesting to me is that I'm focused on this image that I'm projecting a kind of an idealism on. Mm-hmm. That idealism is the want to finish it. It's like, oh, that's a good one. Oh, I'm done. That's good. I can't get any better. I can't get any worse. Or maybe this will work next to this one. Whatever that is. Mm-hmm. They're all very sort of, you know, aesthetic, kind of painterly stops and starts and things like that. And I really like that unlike the printer, which is always thought of in terms of fidelity and resolution, mm-hmm. I want the output to be something that I can't control. You know, I couldn't control the printer, but it's different because when it's printed, it's not the same. Like I have a group of people in the studio, some of them paint well, some of them don't, some of them fill in things really nicely, some of them don't. And what it does is it brings back something for me to see that I can't project. And that's very important for me because I want to be able to look at what I've done or the process that I've been inside of. And I want to be able, when I make work, I always try to make space for me as a viewer.
And does that space sometimes consist of the way you're describing the process with different people's skill levels or working on the work and so on? Is there an element of kind of almost deliberately introducing glitches into the system so that you get away from the precision of the digital image and and through those glitches kind of surprise yourself with the final result?
Yeah, I mean the glitches being that there's somebody that has to paint these little spots like a paint by numbers thing or something like that. Yeah. But that there's so many that it's insane, you know, and I think that process in and of itself is quite ripe for glitches, you know. But I wouldn't say that I'm designing glitches for the output of the work. I'm interested in like more that output should somehow stake itself as output. Differently than, let's say, if it was a photograph or if it was a inkjet print or something like that, or painting, let's say. This, like one of the things when I did a show of paintings, large paintings at Petzl and in New York, which is my gallery in New York. And for me, the really important question, and I would walk around and while we're installing, it says like, are these real paintings? And I was really honest. I was being honest and naive about like, they kind of work like real paintings, but they're weirder. They do different things because of the way they're constructed. Do you know what I mean? You know what I'm trying to get at?
Yeah. And I mean, it sounds like there's almost, there's a stage of you assembling it digitally. there's a stage of when it becomes kind of tactile and unique and with the mark of the hand on it in the studio, whether it's your hand or an assistant who's working on it. And then it seems to me then there's also a third stage, which is when you actually install the work in the space. You know, you've talked about being surprised or having something fresh to look at from your point of view as a viewer when you get to the middle stage. Does that happen again when you get it into the exhibition space and it becomes, instead of work in the studio, work in a public exhibition space?
Yeah, because I think it's a default, because then like you become part of a kind of a public, and it becomes part of public viewing.
Mm-hmm.
So when it goes on the wall, it's not just for me. I have to also read the readings,
yeah,
of the work, and then they become part of the work. And that's what's interesting to me, because with those things that come together, I have a kind of a strategy for judgment of some sort, whether something is successful or not, or what it's actually doing, what's being put out here.
Well, there's two things here. There's kind of how you yourself respond to the work, and sometimes I suppose it's exactly what you thought it would be, and other times you've described, you know, a kind of confusion yourself. But you also mentioned how other people are reading the work. Do you spend a lot of time like listening to responses to the work? Do you lurk around in the gallery to hear what people are saying? Is that interesting?
I love doing that. I think it's really fun. It's actually, and I don't really believe in this thing or care about the idea of like, I don't give a shit what anybody says. I don't give a shit what anybody says, but I want to be like this kind of like pervert voyeur when I'm in the gallery, because I want to see what is it? Okay, what's this thing reading like?
But do you have a sense of what it did read like to people who came to see the exhibit?
I think people read them like abstract drawings, and that that there was sort of mention that there was content in those works that had to do with my personal history of being an immigrant and particularly being driven and kind of processed through that place. And it's like there's nothing clear about it there. And even though I would say every painting, every image, every drawing had at least a handful of images from the archives of there were photographs that then got transformed, either colorized or different things. And it's like, you know, so there were real images of archival images of the history of that place that were embedded in the photographs or in the pictures, but they had been so sort of like, you know, they had been so contaminated with a kind of this tradition of abstraction or whatever it is that I was doing, that you couldn't really see that. And then sometimes people would just like, oh, I love this thing, it's beautiful. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Do you think there were people who felt a little disappointed in a way that there wasn't more specific reference made to the experience of Cuban immigration through the Freedom Tower in the period when you came through it?
I don't know, maybe, but I didn't sense that at all. I mean, I think that there's nothing specific enough in my own memory of that experience for me to really, you know, want to start to chatter that up again that way.
Yeah. I mean, you described it mainly as feeling discombobulated, and you know, if your main memory is just confusion, then it's hard to draw.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even confusion. It's more like there's just bits and pieces of all these things. You know what I mean?
Fragments. And it sounds like, I mean, the drawings are in a way a series of fragments put together too. Then. Yeah. So in that sense, it is.
I mean, there's a kind of a correlation between.
But I think for you that to have the exhibition in a place with such a specific cultural frame of reference is kind of unusual. I mean, you've worked in, you know, quite a variety of different spaces, but usually without that level of kind of historical or even political edge to it. Like, you know, if you do the bookstore at the Dia Art Foundation in New York, that is an unusual place for an artist to do an exhibition in a way, but it's also fairly neutral space. This one is carrying a lot of baggage with it. Did that weigh on you at all, or you just treated it as another space that you were going to work in?
I think you just treat it like another space that you're going to work in, and then you just sort of, you're kind of oscillating back and forth between, oh, this place has this history in it. This place is also like, you know, X amount of meters by X amount of meters. The ceilings are really tall. It's got nice light.
Yeah.
Yeah. This was a paper. They used to print the paper here. You know, they processed 1 million Cubans. I mean, it's all this sort of oscillation between all those things. And, but I mean, the reason I would never sort of land on the politic of one scenario is, I think, you know, like historically my work is sort of the closest thing it sort of rides as, you know, kind of produces as political is the it's sort of indifference to traditional forms of evaluation, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's like I do a lot of different things in a lot of different ways and in a lot of different places, and there are the politics of how and what an aesthetic object should be, you know, and that, you know, there's rigor about this type of work and that type of work, and my work has always sort of tried to find a space that somehow renders that somewhat irrelevant, let's say.
Well, there's often quite a lot of information in your work. I mean, it doesn't usually come out of kind of pure color abstraction, etc. There's usually some set of information, and sometimes the titles have information embedded in them and so on. Yet at the same time, I feel that you're very resistant to a kind of didactic approach where you would be in any way in a position of telling your audience, this is the point of the work and this is the lesson I want you to learn from it, or this is the story I want to tell from it. It seems more like you're throwing a lot of information, a lot of details, sometimes even quite personal information and details, yet at the same time by your approach to that information, you often render that information somewhat inaccessible or even impenetrable to an audience that doesn't already know the information. So there's a kind of ambiguity, I feel, always in your work between a kind of flood of information almost that's there and a kind of refusal to tell people what to make of that information.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be a fair way to read some projects in the work, actually. I mean, I don't I think a lot of that position really comes from, like, you know, somebody who's making work with a deep sense of doubt about what the work is going to do, how it's going to land as an exhibition, all those things, and I rarely make a show that's going to be about something in particular, unless it's something so trivial that it's just clear that it just becomes a kind of a like an embalmed structure to get you started or something like that, you know.
What's an example of something trivial that you used in that way?
Well, like I think I did a show once. It was called Bicycle or something like that. It was like I was thinking about bicycles and I started the exhibition. In the end, there was nothing. It was impossible to even land where the bicycle was or wasn't. You know, things like that. I mean, on the level of titling and things like that. But I like to meander through things and sort of, you know, and kind of almost make spaces where I can be lost in or something like that, more so than find epiphanies or something.
Yeah. Well, the title of this show was Mongrel, which is, you know, both kind of slightly funny and also slightly self-deprecating, because it sort of implies a couple of dogs that met up, not at a high-end breeders, but in an alley somewhere maybe. And you know, the combination, it comes about through desire, the desire of the dogs, I guess, but also through chance and accidental encounters. Is that how you thought of the, in terms of the title Mongrel for this show?
I thought the title Mongrel is all those things you described. I mean, on the one hand, there's a kind of this pejorative aspect in using it, and then, like, you know, most civilized people don't like the term mongrel when it's being used in relation to people, because it is something that's used with animals and things like that. But I always found it really, like, I think we're all freaking mongrels anyway. We all come here, we all go all over the world and basically become what we become through desire, more than through structures, you know. And I think the way you said it is actually really nice. And yeah, I just thought it, you know, I have 5 street dogs in my house, so I always eat kids.
So,
and I'm always like,
you really
freaking mongrels, you quit jumping on me.
And so in a way, you're reclaiming the term that could be used as an insult too, as you know, a mongrel, used as a disparaging term. You're kind of,
yeah, and you know, and it's like, you know, I remember when we came we got to the States. I remember, you know, everybody, but like, we didn't have anything in Cuba. We didn't leave anything. My dad's best line whenever his friends would say, "Are you going back? Don't you want to go back to Cuba when Castro dies?" But he's like, "Why would I want to go back to Cuba? I didn't forget anything there." And, you know, but a lot of our friends who were like us, they would say things like, "Oh, we left all this. We left money buried in the walls. We had these giant houses. We had all this stuff." And it became clear that 90% of that, 99% of those stories were not true. To the point where, like, I would go to a school, and then my friends would say, "Oh, you're Cuban. All my other friends from Cuba were really rich." I was like, no, not the way.
You know, your family moved pretty rapidly from Florida to Chicago, and I mean, you grew up in the Chicago area.
We were only in Florida like 2 days.
Yeah. The experience of growing up as a Cuban American in Illinois, of course, is going to be really quite different than the experience of growing up Cuban American in Miami. When you come back to Miami and you're working in Miami, do you feel that disjunction between your own experience as a Cuban immigrant who didn't stay in Florida and the people who stayed in a very large established Cuban community in Florida? Are you very conscious?
Yeah, I think you just feel like you're somebody who grew up in the Midwest in a way, and with a certain kind of Cuban chatter always coming from one side or whatever. But in general, it's like, you know, I think the politically speaking, the Cuban American agenda has been really so discombobulated. It really hasn't even been about the American politics. It's really been more about the politics of Castro. Yeah, that's what drives, you know, Cuban American, you know, political consensus of some sort. Is that, you know, even now it's not like left or right. I mean, they voted for Clinton, they voted for Obama, they voted for, you know, for Trump. Anyway, so I don't think that I think you just become a different kind of American when you grow up in the Midwest versus one in South Florida. And I don't mean that in any pejorative way at all. I mean, it's just, you are a different type of American. Right. Because of the realities of those cultural specificities. You know, and it's an assimilation process first and foremost. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's like, you know, you figure it out. You know, you get to Chicago and you don't speak any English, and then you learn, and then People were around, they call you spics, and like, what does spic mean? And I don't know. And then you figure it out. It's not nice. You know? Then, you know, and they know this is where, okay, this is, it's because I haven't mastered the language yet, maybe, or, you know, whatever. But it's a process of just being lost and trying to, you know, set forth and place some sort of identity that you feel somewhat stable in, you know, that slowly emerges.
And but in recent years, you've partly become an immigrant again, this time to Mexico, and you spend a lot of time in Merida now, and it's really, you know, I know you go back and forward between New York and Merida, but you're in Merida a lot of the time. What was in your thinking when you decided to make a base in Mexico rather than in the United States, after growing up in Chicago, living in Los Angeles for a long time, and now having the space in the Yucatan?
I'm just sick of living in LA, sick of driving.
Yeah.
I was just tired of the same, like, you know, and also I've been going to Mexico a lot, and I did a project there. It took about 5 years to do. It was really fun. And I love the tropics. I mean, I love heat, I love humidity. I even love all the things people hate about it, you know, and through that project, I realized it went from like some sort of, oh, that'd be fun to live down there, to like, no, I could actually structure the way I live in this place. No reason not to. I like it here. I'm more comfortable here. I can be in New York. LA is a place I always enjoyed living at, but I never felt totally super connected to it.
Yeah.
Because of the nature of the city is like that anyway, unless you know, it's, I always call it like the largest provincial city in the world. And you know, it's a wonderful place to live. It's, you know, and more importantly, I don't think I picked LA. I think LA, I just ended up in LA.
Yeah.
As I started traveling, kind of knowing the world a bit more, I just sort of, I was thinking, like, well, you know, I could live somewhere else if I wanted to. And I just felt very comfortable in Mexico. I think Mexico is an amazing place. It's the most underused resource America has. You know, it's got ancient shit. It's got, you know, these little towns down there are thousands of years old, and people live there. And it's like, you know, I don't know. I mean, it was just a whim, and I was just tired of living in LA, to be honest. I wanted to live somewhere else in a different way, with a different, and also I really liked the idea that I could work really calmly there. As long as I had shippers and hardware stores, I could figure out what to do.
Yeah. And do you feel that you're part of a community there in a way that you weren't in Los Angeles?
No, not necessarily. Kind of enjoy that. Sort of, I feel like when I got there, I mean, I felt like I had the place to myself. And in the last 20 years, it's changed a bit. It's been gentrified a bit, which is good. It's good and bad, but mostly good, because now we have restaurants to eat at and stuff. But I just thought, you know, there's a kind of a part of me that likes to kind of just be someplace where there's nothing. They just kind of go to work and come home.
Yeah.
You know, and I was going to be in New York half the time anyway, so you know, I wasn't going to be missing, you know, some sort of urban experience or anything. Maybe just old people get like that after a while.
Yeah, no, I totally empathize with what you're saying. So Jorge, what's next? You've done this show. Do you have another big project on the horizon?
We have a couple of projects here and there. We're doing actually, we're supposed to be doing the Consulate in Merida. The artist selected, was the artist
the American Consulate.
Yeah, they're building a new one in Merida, which is the city I live in. And then there's a couple projects, there's a bunch of projects different. We're doing a project at Johns Hopkins.
That's great.
These are commissions, you know, like public projects.
Well, I mean, one of the things that's been characteristic of your work is this kind of move in and out of architecture, although you approach architecture in a very distinctive way. Does a project like the Consulate in Merida encompass the building itself, or is
So
it
it encompasses
more
a kind of about
sculptural?
3,000 square feet of the building, so a very small section of the building, and it's sort of like, you know, the way it's been proposed is it's like, okay, there's the building, there's the architecture, but this area, the artwork starts at this door and ends at that one, or something like that. And then we kind of,
Yeah, I would imagine they're quite strict about.
yeah, it's very difficult
parameters,
to, kind of, it's to occupy clearly those kinds of spaces.
yeah.
So, but anyway, did that sound thing for us?
Yes, no, I think that was probably some announcement my computer was giving to me, but I think we are at the point where we could, if people have questions, maybe we could have you try and take some questions from anyone who wants to ask them.
Yes, we've got two here. The first one is from Conchi Bretos. I am a Cuban American living in Merida and wishing to meet Jorge in Merida. My question is, what impact has your Cuban roots in your work? Thank you, and looking forward to meeting you when I am in Merida next.
I don't know what my Cuban roots. I mean, they're responsible for everything and nothing all at the same time. You know, I think you have to have a question like that always comes preloaded, you know, with a kind of that there is going to be an answer of something that will be confirmed about identity as a formative thing. I'm not sure identity, you know, always renders the most interesting aspects of being an artist or making artworks.
Fungible and depends on the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that, but I think it's important that I'm Cuban in my head, I think, because I can't not be, but not necessarily because I would want to put it out into something more than that.
Yeah, I mean, I know what you're saying, Jorge, because I'm Scottish and I'm an immigrant from Scotland to the United States, and I feel on one level extremely Scottish, except that when I'm in Scotland, everyone thinks I'm an American, and so apparently I'm not that Scottish, and yet at the same time I still feel it's kind of integral to my identity, even though apparently no one in Scotland can even recognize it. So it's hard to know what is really important in your background and what you maybe just think is important or want to be important.
Yeah, it's really hard to control that.
Yeah, a lot of it is out of your control.
Yeah.
Okay, and here's a somewhat similar. How does the beautiful, stunning chandelier relate to your experience as an exile? It strikes me as the embodiment of hope, of future possibility.
I've never thought of myself as an exile, I would say.
Okay.
And the Cuban exile position is one that's very particular to a cultural situation that doesn't just reside in Florida, but everywhere else. And I don't want to say this in a way where I don't come across as not respecting people who do think they're in exile, because I respect everybody. But I think we never left Cuba thinking that we were going back. So it was very difficult for me to go and have this sort of notion of an exile. Since I never sort of walked around life like that, it's sort of like these kind of spaces of hope that are tethered to kind of being reconnected to something that you're waiting for or something like that didn't really exist. I mean, I've been back to Cuba a bunch of times. The place is a super interesting shit show. And I continue going. I'm going to continue going. But it's also, I can realistically tell you that you know, the communism is a lost cause from actually living it. But anyway, but that aside, I think hope is a good thing if it comes out of an artwork. I don't think it's a bad thing. I wasn't necessarily, you know, thinking about hope in terms of from the point of view of a Cuban exile, because I don't think of myself as a Cuban exile. I think of myself more, I mean, as an American, kind of we are like people like me and Russell and a bunch of others, and there are millions of people in this country that's the big part of what America is. These kind of like quasi-confused, productive people from all over, you know.
Yeah, I think the idea of exile does definitely imply at some point a return. And
Right.
I think in a way that unlike some other communities that came to the US, the Cuban American community seems to have held on to the idea of exile as opposed to just restarting everything over more than a lot of people have. And but of course it's something that's very specific to that community as well, and the situation is still changing in Cuba, I guess. So you know, there's probably more to come there. But to get back to the chandelier itself, Jorge, I mean, you know, it's interesting to hear the person who asked the question, you know, want to read it in that really kind of symbolic or allegorical way as you know, not just a chandelier, but also as a kind of as a beacon of hope, which
Yeah,
is
which I think is actually quite nice.
described. And you know, how are you open to having that kind of overtly symbolic reading put onto the work? Are you willing to cede all of that to the audience, or do you want to push back against it even?
Oh no, I think that it's lovely that the audience sees that, that sort of can construct those kinds of readings from the work, because that just tells me that there's some sort of you know, there's some fruitful generalization in the work that you can attach a lot of different things to, which is great. I mean, when I speak about the work, I try not to come from the position of saying this is what it is.
Yeah.
My position is more like, this is what I think with the work. I think it change day to day. You know what I mean? But I try to, when I speak about it, I always try to speak about it as a reading of somebody who's using these objects to think with. So yeah, so I mean, I think it's really interesting that this person sees hope in that configuration of that light, because maybe the associative sort of, you know, formalities of it or whatever, and I think it's fantastic. I celebrate that. I don't think that that's, you know, but to answer the question about, you know, whether that's connected to some sense of exile or something is very different. No, I love things that are pretty, and I try to make them pretty when I can.
That's pretty clear from the work, I guess. But in a way, it also relates to your kind of refusal of a didacticism. I mean, you don't have a programmatic approach where you say this represents that represents this, and you're not laying out that kind of program. It's almost a process for you in making it that continues through the reception by the viewer. But it's interesting. I feel that question is interesting because it shows the extent to which work that kind of explicitly doesn't announce a program or a set of meanings can actually be that for people who come to look at it. They can in a way bring their own set of interpretations to it, and that you're also okay with that, even if
and I think that's the reason a question like that emerges is not just because I made it possible by making the work. I don't have that much kind of control. I think the building itself is a contextual, you know, strong contextual possibility for that kind of question. The fact that I am a Cuban American artist. There are a lot of Cubans in Miami.
They're not going to go away.
These questions and these types of readings, you know, it's very likely that they'll emerge. I mean, so yeah, even without me, I don't even have to, you know. Even if you did anything, but anyway.
All right. Well, I think that is it for questions. Do either of you have any closing remarks you'd like to make?
I'd like to thank Russell and thank you and everybody for listening. And yeah, thank you. I've enjoyed it.
And Russell and Jorge,
Yes,
thank you both. And then thank Leonardo, our producer this evening.
Mhm.
And good luck to you both, and hope to see you again soon. Good
Yes,
night, everyone.
very
Have a
much.
great evening.